We we are talking about speaking up and finding your voice. This is an event sponsored by RBC Wealth Management. RBC provides trusted advice and wealth management solutions to individuals, to families, and institutions around the world. And today we're excited to be joined by RBC's Head of Culture and Field Experience, Shireen Luz. Shireen, welcome. Please introduce
Thank
yourself
you.
and tell us about your career journey.
Sure. Thank you, Georgine. And I love that we rhyme. That was not intentional, but it works. So, as you said, I'm the head of culture and field experience at RBC. I really wish I could say that I had my whole career planned out and I just plodded along a path, but that's not actually how it happened. My background and early experience was as an employment litigation attorney. I had the opportunity when I was in law school, worked at the Equal Opportunity Employment Commission. I spent about 8 years in private law practice and I gained a lot of experience, but I was really frustrated because you're dealing with just one problem at a time. And it's after the employment relationship has already broken down. So I started to look for opportunities where I could influence more proactively on the front end. And I found my way to RBC Wealth Management in the law group and went from one male dominated industry to another very male dominated industry. But the commonality and the different roles that I held in private practice and definitely at RBC is that it's always people centered. I want to work close to employees and I really want to have an impact on employees' lives and their experience at work.
Great. We have some stuff in common. We were just chatting earlier about the fact that we both started our careers in law. Um, well, given your role now as head of culture and field experience, what excites you most about your work, day to day or overall? It sounds like you obviously have people at the center of your work.
Yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate because what I get to do is the best parts of all of the roles that I previously had. And it's advocating for employees every day. It's figuring out what will help them have the best experience. And, the role is actually a brand new role. And I'm the first incumbent. And it came about during the pandemic. And we've always been an employee centered, people first culture. But during the pandemic, I think a lot of companies hopefully realized that in order to be successful and come out of the pandemic on a high end, you're going to have to lead with people first. And so RBC put their money where their mouth was and created this executive level job. And it's really about promoting, protecting, and enhancing what I think and a lot of our employees say is our greatest advantage, which is our culture. And I say this often, so if anybody who has heard me talk before, um, you'll hear me say it again. But to me, understanding an employee and having a good employee culture is recognizing that employees are not one dimensional. We're all we're multi-dimensional human beings, and we have these really complex and full lives outside of work. And I want employees to be able to bring all of their complexity to work. And I think employers are really obligated to support all aspects of their lives, not just you as an employee. I think if we really only look at an employee as an employee, we're missing some really important aspects, but also some of the productivity and ways that we can really get the best out of our employees. And so I get to work to find ways where RBC can support all of an employee's different dimensions, and whether that's through a caregiver leave or elder care leave, backup child care, gender transition support, mental health resources, all of that. I think then we have the makings for the foundation to be a leader in this space with what we're doing. We put employees first, and we're going to continue to focus on the non-business aspects of employees because to me, that's where the future is. We learned that in the pandemic, and I think that's just going to continue. We're not going to go backwards, and it's my job to make sure RBC doesn't go backwards in that space.
You're so right that one of the silver linings of the pandemic was that people had to talk about what was going on with them personally,
Mhm,
and all the and more barriers came down, I think. And but
mhm,
it's important what you're saying because people are changing their work styles and habits, and more people are going back to the office. So it's wonderful to see that RBC is consciously investing in continuing what started, not
mhm,
just viewing it as a blip on the screen. You mentioned mental health, which
mhm.
obviously was a huge topic during the last couple of years. Can you tell us a little? I know this topic's important to you, so I
Yeah.
would love to
Mhm.
hear your view on, why mental health is important, how does it manifest itself in the workplace?
Sure. Thank you for the question. And it is one that I don't know that there's a more important question in the workplace right now is how are we as employers and companies supporting employees' mental health and mental well-being? And I feel personally really strongly about erasing the stigma that surrounds talking about mental health. And so part of the way I do that is leading from the front and sharing my own stories about my battles with anxiety and mental health challenges. And it I didn't always do this. A few years ago, I was in my office and I was meeting with a more junior level employee, and she had just come back from maternity leave. And we started to talk. And I always like to start my one on one meetings with, how are you? Not what's going on with work, but how are you? How are you doing? And, she started, with the high voice and she's like, oh, it's going well. And then all of a sudden you could kind of see the cracks in the facade and her eyes welled up and she just started talking about how much she was struggling with becoming a mother, balancing everything. And, she had tears in her eyes. And all of a sudden she stopped and she looked at me and she's like, oh, you have always have it all together. You must think I'm such a mess. And I looked at her and I like turned around and I'm like, "Me? Like I have it together? I'm a total disaster." And in that moment was the first time that I publicly shared that I had battled with mental health challenges. After my first son was born, I had severe postpartum anxiety. I actually ended up in a psychiatric facility. But you know, I had learned so much from it, but what I hadn't learned was to be open about it and how much I could teach others and help other people feel comfortable. So I stuffed it and pretended like, it was a non-issue. And I had so much shame around it that I didn't talk about it. And in that moment, when I was sitting there watching, I just thought, how I've missed the mark on this. I could have shared this. And I told her, I just laid it all out there. I shared my story and I I really realized that I created this facade that I'm okay. And in the process, I've given this idea that everybody always has to be okay. And that's just not reality. We all go through difficult times. And I wanted to stop hiding my imperfections, and now I probably have taken it to the opposite extreme, as many people would say, because I'm constantly like, oh, you're not gonna believe what I did now. And like I'll joke about it, like the time I showed up at work with two different colored shoes, hadn't noticed it, or the time I spent, about 9 hours with spit up all down my suit coat, didn't notice it. But that's the real life. And, I think women leaders, and I have done this to the female leaders I've looked up to, like we put them on a perfection pedestal where, oh, look, they're so perfect, but nobody is perfect. And I had this idea that I had to be superwoman. I needed to balance my career and my home life and, my friends and everything. But superwoman isn't real. And the vulnerability and authenticity, that is what makes a leader a good leader. It's not some idea of perfection that isn't attainable for anyone, nor is it approachable if that's how you are. So I just really feel strongly about talking about where people are at, and being honest about challenges on a daily basis.
That's you said so many things there, but I think the theme of, this conversation about finding your voice is using it in all the ways that can make
Mhm,
other people feel supported and seen. Like this woman you were speaking of must have felt so seen when you
mhm,
share your story, and it demonstrates great empathy on your part. Um, You mentioned you mentioned that women leaders in particular have this burden to be seen in a certain way.
Mhm,
Can, I, how does that maybe intersect with what International Women's Day, which we just celebrated yesterday, mean to you?
mhm,
How do you think about what does it mean to support other women in the workplace, which is a big focus area of Fairygodboss? What
mhm.
does it mean for you personally in your career? How have you experienced it? What would you like to share about that?
Yeah. Oh gosh, it's so much there. Like International Women's Day. Um, just a few years ago, I would mention it to people and they're like, "What? What's the day? What are you talking about?" And yesterday I'm walking around and I got text messages from male colleagues. I got emails, saying Happy International Women's Day. And I just thought, yes, like, yes, this is happening. This is becoming bigger. But um, so it's really meaningful because to me, it's about bringing all of our voices together. It's about the power in the collective. And, one of the things that I in particular have done a lot of growth in is finding my own voice and speaking up. Early in my career, I really didn't feel like I, I had a lot to say. I didn't think that what I had to say was intelligent enough or people would value it enough. So I kept quiet. And particularly I'll share a really personal story. In my early days, in my first professional role, and it was many, many years ago, um, I had a manager who every day throughout the day would make really inappropriate comments, sexual innuendo, and just about every day would touch me inappropriately. And I didn't say anything. I didn't tell anyone. Um, I left. So instead of speaking up and using my voice, I left the organization and I went somewhere else and, tried to pretend that that hadn't happened. But it's an experience I look back on a lot now and think, gosh, this is so much a part of how I've landed where I am because here I didn't feel like I had a voice. I didn't use the voice I had. I walked away. And so now I've spent my, career for the last 20 years trying to help employees find a voice to feel comfortable. Um, and it's not lost on me that if I would have spoken up, maybe I could have saved another woman from the same experience with that manager at that company. And so I'm speaking up now, um, and reopening really a painful part of my past, not because, everybody encounters this, Lord willing, this is becoming a rarity in our current workplaces, but it's about more than just situations of sexual harassment. It's about everyday situations because it was pervasive for me. I didn't have a voice in meetings. I didn't exercise my voice in discussions with leadership. So when it came to something that was so hard, um, there was no chance I was going to speak up. So it's about finding your voice in all aspects. And you hear a lot of people talk about, especially when it comes to women, imposter syndrome, and you know, believe in it or not. Um, to me, fundamentally, whether it has a title, it's this nagging inner voice of I'm not capable of making really meaningful contributions. What I have to say, nobody wants to listen to. So I have, had a past of letting my self-doubt and insecurity impact how I acted at work. Um, Sitting in those conference rooms and not speaking up and knowing the answer or having an idea, but I was like, oh, you know what? Nobody's really going to like this, or gosh, what if they think I'm stupid? So, in talking to other people, especially other women, and being more vulnerable and sharing, like, hey, like I had this idea, I've learned I'm not alone. And there's a lot of us sitting there feeling that same way. So, I'm trying to speak up so that I can show others that they can speak up too, and they should, and that we have good ideas, and that sometimes our ideas suck, but so does everybody else's. Like
Right.
nobody's perfect. And, it's better to speak up and be wrong than to sit there and never speak up at all and miss that chance that you had that great idea or you have that opportunity. And if I've learned anything, um, the louder and bolder I've gotten, it's that more opportunity and responsibility has come my way. When I was quiet and in the backdrop, I just kind of floated along, kind of doing the same thing in similar level roles. But the bigger my voice, the bigger the impact, and the higher the level roles I've been given the opportunity to be in. And so I've learned it firsthand, but it isn't easy. I mean, it's easy for me to say now, given where I'm at, but I've been there. I've been that quiet one, but collectively we can do it. And I think it's not just about women speaking up, it's about making space for women to speak up, especially women of color. We need to create environments where it feels safe for women and women of color to speak up. And that starts at the top, that starts with leadership. And a lot of times it starts with giving them the opportunity to speak, not making them raise their hand, but giving them the opportunity, putting them at the front.
Right. Oh, wow. You said so many things I relate to. I certainly relate to the idea that speaking up helps you advance because no one is going to see you unless you see yourself and make yourself be seen. But I
Hmm.
also relate to the idea that you have to speak up in order to make space for other people. Like invite
Hmm.
another woman or a junior colleague to say something, ask for elicit their opinion,
Hmm.
and also elicit their possible critique of a culture, right? Which you
Yes.
sometimes can be very difficult to do when you're the one on the on the back foot. Like in your case, it was quite serious. But I remember being in finance earlier in my career, and everyone was doing push-up contests in the hallway, and it was just nothing I couldn't part. It wasn't like sexual harassment. I couldn't
Yeah.
participate, or not
Yeah.
in the way that they could. I'm not wearing my like
Hmm.
skirt suit
Right.
every day,
Right.
right? So I think that speaking up helps elevate all women, and then obviously it helps elevate yourself.
Hmm.
But it is hard, and so to that end, do you have any advice for someone who is conscious that it benefits them and would
Hmm.
do it more, but they just have trouble, like
Hmm.
trouble speaking up? What can they do?
Yeah, so I have a couple. I have kind of the collective effort of employee resource groups. Most companies have them. I think they're a really fantastic way to find support, to test it out. So you can start small. You can start with a smaller group. You can start with somebody that you feel comfortable with and build up from there. I think also it's not about saying, here you go. I'm now going to be the loudest voice in the room. Like it's one step at a time. It's one day at a time. It's like what I often think about when I'm trying to, like get on a good workout regimen. Like I'm not going to think about I need to do 30 days in a row of working out. I need to do today. Like I'm going to work out today. And I think it's the same with finding your voice. It's today. I'm going to give myself a goal of contributing once during this meeting. Start small and then aggregate it because you can build confidence that way. But I do think employee resource groups are such a great area to find and network people. And I'm somebody, I like the comfort in, oh, there's a friendly face in the room. And so starting with that friendly face and starting with somebody that you know and feel comfortable with, and then start branching out more. But I think start small and start with somebody close to you if you have that opportunity. But I think like I said earlier, it's a two-way street. It's not just on employees. And we need to be really intentional as employers and as managers and leaders to make that space really intentional.
To your point about practicing and being just taking a step, I mean, I think
Mhm.
everyone on this webinar can go into the chat and say something you're proud of doing and what you've accomplished today. We want to hear it. We want to celebrate you. And I think practice does make perfect. It absolutely takes practice. I always say that confidence is a skill that you can build. It's not like it's
Mhm.
innate. You're not
Mhm.
born with it. You walk your way to confidence as you try something and it works. You try again and it works again. And sometimes the efforts will not work, but you have to try again so that your odds are the odds are with you.
Right. Mhm.
Uh, how can you said it's a two-way street though, so
Mhm.
encouraging other people to speak up. I mean, I think that one of the ways that we've tried to do it as a small employer at Fairygodboss is just put it in our company values that we
Mhm.
want everyone here to use their voices to make our company and our culture better, because it's not going to
Mhm.
get better just in my head because I have an idea. It's only going to get
Mhm.
better if we hear from the multiplicity of types of people that work here. um, what do you think works when it comes to people leaders encouraging others to speak up?
So I think it has to start with vulnerability and authenticity. I think leaders who just put it out there and who are open and vulnerable, the response you get is that in return. When I started to share my story with my mental health challenges, I connected with people on just such a different level. And showing them that, hey, I'm human just like you are. I have struggles just like you are. And I think the more leaders that can do that and lead from an authentic and really vulnerable space, the more you invite it in the company. I think it just we we have these ideas of, what leadership looks like, and you look at like a general in the army, and who wants to approach that person when you look at kind of all the pomp and circumstance around it? Who wants to approach that person and say, hey, I've got this situation at home, I'm trying to care for, my mother, she's sick, I need some flexibility? Or is it the person who said, hey, you know what, um, my dad's not doing well, and I'm having a hard time focusing today.
Mhm.
So I apologize if I seem distracted, but that's what's going on with me. And so to me, it's that's at its root the quickest way to make an impact. And I don't mean everybody needs to, cut open a vein just for the sake of it, but I just mean be genuine and be honest and connect on a level that is really human. And that, we were talking about silver linings from the pandemic, and to me, that's one of them. We've been welcomed into
Yes.
athletes' homes, and you see their partners, you see their family members, their pets, and it's we oftentimes used to pretend that that life didn't exist when we came into the office. Well, whether we're in the office or at home, like, let's embrace that. Let's talk about it. Let's get to know one another on, that level. And I routinely interrupt whatever's going on, and I'll be like, is that your cat? Tell me about your cat. Or, oh, is that your son? Just tell me something about yourself, and just open up the humanness, because we're all human and we're all dealing with some challenge. And I think starting from there makes a big difference. Um, but I also think inviting the feedback and truly having that proverbial open door policy, like, hey, come to me, um, without fear of repercussion, without fear of judgment, just come to me.
Mhm.
And something I think is incredibly important, and I say this often to employees, is admit you don't know. An employee who pretends like they always have the answers makes me nervous. I have a hard time trusting them. But an employee who will say, gosh, can I come back to you on that? I don't know the answer to that. I
Yes.
trust them immediately.
Right. So role modeling
Mhm.
authenticity and communicating who you are is a way to create a safer space for the people around you to raise their voices too. And
Mhm. Mhm.
yeah, I think that's right. It does matter how the people at the top of a company behave. Um,
Yes.
speaking of that and role modeling, can you talk about some of your accomplishments recently or overall in any area of your life that I'm sure the audience would be very interested in hearing?
Sure, sure. Well, starting personally, I have two boys that somehow, despite having me as their mother, have made it to age 11 and 7. So that's a huge accomplishment. Um, but no, work-wise, you know, I work for a great company, but there's many things I'm really proud of, but something that we did just a couple of years ago was we implemented a caregiver leave. So we have wonderful benefits. We have, maternity leave, we have parental leave, adoption leave, we have medical leave, we have all of these leaves, but we didn't have leave if you're caring for a sibling or you're caring for a spouse, when it wasn't your medical condition. And there was an employee whose husband had a severe accident and he was critically injured, and she'd used all of her paid time off caring for him, and she wasn't ready to come back to work but couldn't afford to continue to be out. And I was really bothered by that, because I felt like we had all of these safety nets in place, but this felt like a miss. And so I worked with our finance group, came up with what it was going to cost, and it was expensive. But I felt really strongly about it. So pulled the business case together, and I sat down with our CEO, Michael Armstrong, and our president, Tom Sagasor, and I kind of walked him through it. And the cost was a lot, to roll this out, because it's something for all employees. Everybody's eligible, and it's 4 weeks of paid time off. And I proposed it, and we talked through it, and our CEO looked at me and he said, I cared for my father when he was dying, and it was a lot of work, and I missed a lot of work, but I was fortunate to be at a level where I could afford to miss that time. And he said, but not every employee is. And he looked at me and said, this is a no-brainer. And they approved it, and we rolled it out. And it was so meaningful to me, because we could turn around and go to that employee and say, here's 4 weeks that you can stay home with your husband and not worry about how you're going to pay the bills. Or an employee who is caring for a sick child, especially in the last couple of years. We also did a lot during the pandemic, where we had employees who, as every company did, where all of a sudden schools and daycares are shut down. So we gave employees an additional 20 days of paid time off to take care of their kids. And that's huge. And, that directly impacted our bottom line, but it was the right thing to do. And it's really embracing all aspects of an employee's life. So I'm really proud of our caregiver leave. And, we also expanded. So we have a backup childcare network, and it was initially focused on our major hubs. Well, we expanded it to our entire US footprint, so that no matter where you work, there's backup childcare. But then we also added in elder care. So there's now an elder care benefit. So if you need assistance for a family member to go to medical appointments or home care, we've got this whole roster of qualified, certified providers. And so I'm really proud of that. So that would be my.
Understandably proud of that. I will say that I'm sure it pays off in terms of employee loyalty, referrals, talent acquisition. I mean, these things are not just the right thing to do. They're probably also quite, even though you mentioned it affects the bottom line, it affects the bottom
Mhm.
line in a positive way too.
Yes.
The ROI math is hard on these things, but I think when you invest in people, and people are the core of your business, as it is, I'm sure, at RBC, then
Mhm.
you're basically investing in your most important asset. And we
Mhm. That's
see,
exactly it.
yeah,
Mhm.
and we see all the time in our community that when women are working at employers with greater paid leave or parental leave, they report higher levels of job satisfaction, because
Mhm.
they're in a culture. It's not like you do A and B happens. It's A is emblematic of something larger, and then you are more satisfied with your work, and you're probably more likely to stay.
Right. Right. And I have this conversation often with people at other firms, where you can roll out a great benefit, but if you don't have the culture and all of the other pieces that go along with it, like you said, it's not just one thing, it's a whole network of benefits and culture. You're not going to keep those people. You may recruit them in because of, some shiny piece that attracted them, but you've got to have the culture that supports it. And, the caregiver leave to me is like emblematic of all of the things that we do, because we don't just look at what did this employee produce? How many widgets did they produce today? We look at, wow, that person is, a sibling, a child, caring for their parents. Like, there's so many facets to who they are.
Right. That is related to something that's a little bigger picture. When I think about, what we just International
Mhm,
Women's Day was yesterday, and we're talking about the employee experience. I think gender equality in the workplace is something that you alluded to. You've seen some progress in the kind
mhm,
of sexual harassment that you experienced early in your career is probably less, especially after Me Too, is just not going to be acceptable the same way. But how do you? So number one, like what progress have you seen? Let's focus on the good things that have happened because it's not all perfect, but there are changes, and I imagine that you've seen them over your career. What have you seen in terms of progress in your work and life on gender
mhm,
equality?
mhm. I have fortunately seen many, even at my time with RBC, looking at the number of female leaders. So financial services, it's less than 20% of female advisors are women. So you take that into a company and then you look at leadership ranks among those statistics, and it's not impressive to see the number of women. And then it's an even smaller number of women of color. But from 15 years ago when I joined RBC to today, the number of female field leaders, I mean, it is tenfold in an increase. The number of advisors, like, we're making progress. We're not there yet, but we're making progress. And I also think that we're doing more creatively. We're not just looking at it as a numbers game. We're looking at it from the standpoint of, how do you get people interested in the field, for one? How do you capture women earlier? Everybody's probably heard about the statistics about what happens with girls in STEM, and how in, elementary school it's about even, but by the time you get to middle school, the number of girls following the math and sciences just drops dramatically. Well, that continues. So looking at different ways that we can impact that. So partnering with organizations where we can go in and show financial services or show careers for women that are non-traditional. So being bigger than just RBC, and the great saying of a rising tide lifts all ships. Like, we got to do this together. It's not, in spite of or against another company. It's, we got to do this together. Because if we want to move, we've got to move faster. And the only way we can do that is collectively. So it's really kind of taking down the traditional competition and saying, we as an industry, or we as an organization, we're going to come together and we're going to work on this together. So I think there's a lot more partnership out there. There's a lot more interest in it. More organizations like Fairygodboss. I mean, it's such a fantastic platform. So I have seen progress. Just, we have an 11-member executive committee at Wealth Management. We have 4 women now. That's fantastic.
Yes.
It'll be great when we have 11, but right now we have 4. And I think lifting each other up. And I have seen in my career, particularly, early in my career, where women kind of tore each other down. You talk about, like, who are the most difficult managers that you worked for? And oftentimes you'd hear women say other women. And it was this almost scarcity mentality where, well, there's only enough space for one woman. But I think of it and I see it at work every day, especially within the executive committee, is I liken it to having children where, I have my first child and I think I could not possibly love another human more. And then I remember thinking when I was pregnant with my second, like, wow, I I'm going to feel so bad. What if I don't love this one as much as the first one? Like, how can your heart handle that, right? But your heart expands. And so it's not a matter of not having enough, you expand. And I think that's exactly how it is for opportunities for women. It's not about me taking the spot from someone else, we create more opportunities for more women. And so it's a multiplier. And I think I've seen that. And I think that's what we need to continue to do, is to continue to make space for an opportunity for women, because it's going to just continue to multiply.
I agree that the scarcity factor probably made people feel very competitive with each other for their own
Mhm.
survival. It's something that I think has changed in popular culture too. There's just a, you know, helping helping someone else does not bring you down.
Right, right.
Right?
Yep.
And I think sponsorship is so important, whether a woman
Mhm.
gets sponsorship from a man or a woman. It's a big part of that lifting each other up
Yes.
mentality
Yes.
that moves forward. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. That voice in the room that, is advocating for you when you're not there. That voice saying she would be wonderful at this. And to your point, like oftentimes still, unfortunately, that voice is male,
mhm.
but that's why we need our male allies. We need them advocating. We need them advocating for women, and especially for women of color, because that's how we're going to get more women and more women of color in that spot to be sponsors for the next generation.
Yeah, and actually, I don't even think that term male ally came into like the popular vernacular until maybe like a decade ago. I didn't
Yeah.
hear that, right? So
Hmm.
the fact that men are conscious of it, I think, is really important too.
I agree. I agree.
So, speaking of this, I mean, are there things that you think companies can, or I mean, we've talked about individuals lifting each other.
Hmm.
Companies can systematically support women in the
Hmm.
workplace.
Hmm.
What can be done to further gender equality in the career context for women?
Hmm. Hmm.
Like you,
I Yeah, absolutely. One of the top on my list is what we were just talking about, sponsorship.
yeah,
We've got a lot of mentors. We're great at mentoring, but we need sponsors. We need somebody who's going to be our voice if we're not in that room. And so we need leaders to be advocating for women, for upcoming women. And if you are someone who has a position of influence and power, speak up, speak loud, speak often. Um, I joke that it's not pulling somebody up by the bootstraps. It's like, I'm gonna rip you right up and I'm gonna hold you up. Like, you've got to pull somebody with you, because we didn't get here on our own. So we need to be paying it forward. So I think it's, if you have a position of power and influence, you grab somebody and you drag them if you have to, but you bring them in.
mhm.
And you have to be intentional. I keep saying that, but it can't just be, oh, yeah. I mean, you have to literally sit there and say, here's my list of really talented women. Um, Here are the opportunities that are coming available. I'm going to go advocate for that person. And if you don't have women in your organization that have that position that can do that, then find a man, because we've got a lot of great allies out there. Help them, help other women. And then I do think that there's a lot of power in, I mentioned it earlier, our resource groups, our ERGs. It's the power of the collective. And they can get a lot done because they can exert a lot of power, a lot of influence and pain
Yeah.
on leadership. And so it's kind of the power of the collective.
Yes, you don't have to ask on behalf of yourself for a different benefit. You can sort of say, look, this group represents a larger subset of
Mhm.
this company, and we
Yeah.
feel that, this is, I mean, I'm so encouraged by the work that I see that women ERG groups do in terms of expanding access to parental leave, which is a hot, but I
Mhm.
mean, increasingly more companies have it, but there's still a huge number of companies in America that don't have any kind of paid leave.
Mhm.
Not to
Yeah.
mention the kinds of paid leave that RBC has of the different kinds,
Right. Right.
right? But it's very difficult for a single employee to make an impact advocating
Mhm.
for that, or even a single
Mhm.
person in an HR position without
Absolutely.
the support.
Absolutely. And within, if you do have an ERG, push for a sponsorship program, a
Yeah.
formal sponsorship program. Again, mentorships are wonderful. They are. But all the studies show women have so many opportunities for mentorship. We're over mentored, under sponsored. So advocate for that sponsorship program. Run it out of the ERG if you need to.
I mean, have you had a personal experience with sponsorship that impacted and helped you progress in your career? I can tell you're really passionate about it. So, did this work for you? Did it happen to you?
Yeah, it has. I had somebody who went to bat for me. I was again like kind of middling along in a great role for many, many years, but it wasn't until I had someone go to the top of the house and say, "Hey, I think she'd be really fantastic in this role." And that opened up the subsequent 3 roles. Um, and so I am very passionate about it. And I've also seen it happen when you do have that proverbial seat at the table, and it happens. You're talking about talent, you're talking about people in the organization. And it's oftentimes that, same couple people, but if you can bring light to someone that maybe they aren't as familiar with, that can make a big difference. Um, and so I've experienced it personally, and I've watched it happen. And so I'm determined to continue that.
That is awesome. I'm now looking to the chat for questions because I think our time is going to switch over to that. Um, One question is, how do we let go, I love this, of the traditional expectation in the professional setting that we can't, there's no crying in baseball in quotes, in order to embrace showing up as a whole imperfect person? Where is the line between this? You said opening a vein,
Yeah.
you know, and 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 leading with vulnerable transparency, right? Like
Mhm.
there is a line, and
Mhm.
different people have different lines, I'm sure,
Yeah.
function of their culture, upbringing, etc.
Right. Well, and you can probably, I like to use real life examples in my mind. So you can probably all think of that colleague who every day it was another piece of drama. And, you're hearing about an ex-boyfriend, you're hearing about, their mom, their sister, their brother, um, and, and they're kind of a mess every day. That is not what vulnerability is. Vulnerability in my authentic vulnerability is not vulnerable to be vulnerable. It's not airing all of your dirty laundry. It's opening yourself up to share and to show that you trust that person, or you're willing to trust that person, by sharing a bit of yourself. And, you know, it's a great question because it can be too much, but it can also be too little, and it has to be comfortable. I mean, you don't want to be like, okay, hold on, I'm going to force some tears here, like it's not that. It's just being more of yourself and recognizing that you don't have to be perfect, but you don't want to be that person either. So it's, what, if you're having a really rough day, you don't have to check that life at the door. You can just say, hey, I'm having a really rough day. I don't want to talk about it, but I'm going to put my head down and I'm going to do the best I can. Or, maybe I just need 5 minutes. So it's reading the room, but it's also recognizing that you don't have to be stoic and, that really false persona all of the time.
I love the guidance of anchoring on trust as the
Mhm,
principle, like just showing that you trust them with something.
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
Actually, in that vein, another question. I mean, because this is all about the nuance of how do you be authentic and use your voice.
mhm,
Somebody has a question from the audience. How do you speak up and use your voice without sounding like you're attacking someone with your words? I assume this is in the context of having criticism or something negative to share.
mhm, mhm.
That can
Yeah,
be a difficult time for people to speak up.
yes, it can. And it I try to start from assume positive intent. So if you're going into providing the feedback or receiving the feedback, start from a place of assuming positive intent. And if you're going to be providing critical feedback, start from the standpoint of how would I feel if I were receiving this feedback? So, what would make it easier to hear, particularly if it's in a large group? Is it, first ask yourself, is it something that should it really be discussed in this large group?
Right.
Hopefully it is, right? And it's something that's going to benefit everybody in the room. And then it's starting, I often will start with, I I really appreciate what you're saying. I think I'm understanding you to say this. What about if we look at it from this perspective? Or I think another approach would be XYZ.
Mhm.
So it's coming at it not as a this or that, but an and standpoint. So what about if we look at it this way? But as the audience, I try to come at it from they have a positive intent, they're not coming at me, but then you also try to frame it, how would I want to hear it? How would I be most receptive?
I like that you described it as an and statement because I've actually heard there's research that when someone says the word but, that your guardrails go up and you stop being
Yep.
able to listen because all you can feel is, oh, I've just been rejected. My idea has been
Mhm.
rejected. My voice has been rejected.
Yep.
And sometimes disagreeing by using the word and can make somebody
Right.
listen to you more.
Right. Well, and again, it's offering up a different view of it. It's not, especially in discussions, there's very rarely a right or wrong answer. So how do you put your view out there in a way that is collaborative and partnering with the person that has a different view from you?